Good morning. The topic that I am going to discuss is all about the Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective. So, what is Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective? So, Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective provides the teacher a structured guide in formulating more specific learning target as they provide a list of learning objectives. So the taxonomy does not only serve as a guide for teachers' instruction, but it is also a guide for their assessment of students' learning in the classroom. So the Bloom's taxonomy consists of three domains. The first one is the cognitive, second is the affective, and the third is the psychomotor. So these three domains correspond to the three types of goal that the teacher wants to assess. First is the knowledge-based goal or the cognitive goal. Second is the skill-based goal or the psychomotor. And the third is the affective goal, which is the affective. So each taxonomy consists of different level of expertise with varying degrees of complexity. So the taxonomy describes 6 levels of expertise. First is the knowledge, second is the comprehension, third is the application, fourth is the analysis, and fifth is the synthesis, lastly is the evaluation. So the first cognitive level under the Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective in cognitive domain is knowledge. Knowledge is the ability of the student to recall or recognition of learned materials such as ideas, concepts, facts, and procedures. The illustrative verbs that can be used under the cognitive level knowledge are define, recall, names, enumerate, and label. So the example of this cognitive level is enumerate the 6 levels of expertise under the Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective in cognitive domain. The second is comprehension. It is understanding the meaning of the learned materials, including interpretation, explanation, and literal translation. So, the illustrative verbs that can be used under the comprehension are explain, describe, summarize, discuss, and translate. Example of this cognitive level is explain how the butterfly is being formed. The third is application. Application is the use of abstract ideas, principles, or methods to a specific concrete situation. The illustrative verbs that can be used in application are applies, demonstrate, produce, illustrate, and uses. Examples is illustrate how photosynthesis takes place. So the fourth cognitive level is analysis. It is the separation of concept or idea into constituent parts of element and an understanding of the nature and association of an element. So the illustrative verbs that can be used under the cognitive level analysis are compare, contrast, categorize, classify, and calculate. Example are compare and contrast the 6 levels of expertise in Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective under the cognitive domain. So another cognitive level is synthesis. It is the construction of elements or parts from the different sources to form a more complex or novel structure. So the illustrative verbs that can be used are compose, construct, create, design, and integrate. Example of synthesis is composed learning targets using Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective. Another cognitive level is the evaluation. It is making judgment of ideas or methods based on sounds and established criteria. So the illustrative verbs that can be used in evaluation are appraise, evaluate, judge, conclude, and criticize. Example of evaluation under the cognitive level is evaluate the congruence between learning targets and assessment methods. So the first that I discuss is the Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective for knowledge-based goal. So the second one that I'm going to discuss is the Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective for skill-based goal, or it is the psychomotor. So the first level of expertise is the perception. So perception, it uses sensory cues to guide action. So example of perception is using observation. How will you decide what solution needs to be diluted? The second level of expertise is set. It demonstrates readiness to take action to perform tasks. Example is describe how photosynthesis takes place. The third is guided response. It knows or the step is required to complete the task. Example is determine the density of a group of sample metals with regular and irregular size. The fourth level of expertise is mechanism. So it is the ability of the student to perform tasks in somewhat confident, proficient, and habitual manner. So example of mechanism is mix 1 tablespoon and vinegar and 1 teaspoon of kerosene. Write a report about the activity. So another level of expertise is complex over response. So it is the ability of the student to perform tasks in confident, proficient, and habitual manner. So unlike in the fourth level of expertise, the student perform tasks in somewhat confident. In this complex over response, the student can perform tasks in confident. So example is mix 1/4 cup of water and 1/4 cup of oil, stir and observe what happened. So the sixth expertise of skill-based goal is perform task or objective as above, but can also modify action to account for new problematic situation. This is called adaptation. Adaptation is the sixth of the level of expertise. So example is 3 ml of base is required to one acid, while 75 ml is required for another. So what can you do to get valid data for all the unknown acid? So the seventh expertise is organization. It creates new tasks or objective incorporating learned ones. Example is recall some weaving techniques you have learned and apply it in weaving using yarn or banana leaves. So the third domain is the Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective for affective goals or affective. So the first level of expertise is receiving. It demonstrates willingness to participate in the activity. So example of this expertise is when the teacher is discussing, I listen and take notes for the important details. So the second level of expertise is responding. So it shows interest in the objects, phenomena, or activity by seeking it out or pursuing it for pleasure. So example of this level of expertise is I complete my homework and participate in class. The third level of expertise is valuing. So it internalizes an appreciation for the objectives, phenomena, or activity. Example is I seek out information in popular media related to the study. So the fourth level of expertise is organization. So it compare different values and resolve conflict between them to form an internal consistent system of values. Example is some of the ideas I have learned in my class is differ from my previous belief. How can I resolve this? So the fifth level of expertise is characterization by value or value complex. So it adapts a long-term value system that is pervasive, consistent, and predictable. So example of this level of expertise is I decided to take my family in a vacation to visit some of the places I've learned from the class. So the Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective was being revised by Anderson and Cratwell. Anderson and Cratwell proposed a revision of the Bloom's taxonomy in the learning domain by introducing two-dimensional model for writing learning objectives. So in Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective, there are three domains. In Anderson and Cratwell revised Bloom's taxonomy, there are two-dimensional model for writing learning objective. These are the knowledge dimension and the cognitive process of dimension. So under the knowledge dimension, there is factual, conceptual, procedural, and metacognitive. Unlike the cognitive process of dimension, there are 6 cognitive process of dimension. These are remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So the first dimension under the revised Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective is cognitive process dimension. Under the cognitive process is create. Create is done by combining parts to make a whole. So the illustrative verbs that can be used in create is compose, procedure, develop, formulate, devise, prepare, design, construct, propose, and reorganize. Example is propose a program of action to help solve Metro Manila's traffic congestion. Second cognitive process is evaluate. It is judging the value of information or data. So illustrative verbs that can be used is assess, measure, estimate, evaluate, critic, or judge. Example is critic the latest film that you have watched. Use the critic guidelines and format discussed in the class. The third cognitive process is analyze. So analyze, the student would break down information into parts. The illustrative verbs that can be used is analyze, calculate, examine, test, compare, differentiate, organize, or classify. So example of the cognitive process analyzed is classify the following chemical elements based on some categories or areas. So the fourth level of expertise of cognitive process is apply. Applying the facts, rules, concept, and ideas in another text. So the cognitive process apply used the illustrative verbs apply, employ, practice, relate, use, implement, carry out, and resolve. So example of the level of expertise apply is solve the following problem using the different measures of central tendency. The fifth level of expertise under the cognitive process of dimensional is understand. Understanding what is the information means. Example of illustrative verbs that can be used under the level of expertise understand are describe, determine, interpret, translate, paraphrase, and explain. Example is explain the causes of malnutrition in the country. The sixth level of expertise is remember. It is done by recognizing and recalling facts. So the illustrative verbs that can be used under the level of expertise remember are identify, list, name, underline, recall, retrieve, and locate. Example is name the 7th president of the Philippines. So the second dimension in revised Bloom's taxonomy of educational objective is what we call knowledge dimension. So the first level of expertise under the knowledge dimension is factual. Factual tells the facts or bit of information that one needs to know in a discipline. Usually, it answers the questions what, where, who, and when. Example of factual in knowledge dimension is what is the capital city of Philippines? The second knowledge dimension is conceptual. Conceptual, it tells the concept generalization, principle, theories, and models that one needs to know in a discipline. Usually, it answers the questions that begins with what. Example is, what makes the Philippines Pearl of the Orient Sea? So, the third knowledge dimension is procedural. Procedural tells the process, steps, techniques, methodologies, and specific skills needed in performing a specific task that one needs to know to be able to do in a discipline. Usually, it answers the question that begins with how. For example, how do we develop items for an achievement test? So, the fourth knowledge dimension is metacognitive. So, this type of knowledge makes the discipline relevant to one's life. It makes one understand the value of learning of someone's life. This requires reflective knowledge and strategies on how to solve problems or perform cognitive tasks through understanding one text and context. Example is, why is engineering the most suitable course for you? So, the revised Bloom's taxonomy, or the one that being revised by Anderson and Cratwell, provides teacher a more structured and more precise approach in designing and assessing learning objectives.